Hello, everybody. I welcome you to the fourth Postdigital Lunch with the title From Random Participation to Active Mining, People, Processes, Resources and Spaces. In the framework of the Leibniz Science Campus Postdigital Participation, where we focus on social participation in today's post-digital world. I am Folke Köbberling, artist and head of the Institute for Architecture-Related Art, with my colleague Wolf Tilo Balke, who holds the chair for Informatic Systems, and our colleague Susan Ropra-Presans from Business Informations. We are an interdisciplinary team from 3 departments of the TU Braunschweig. Our project title is People, Digital Intelligence, Reuse, Shaping City Life Together. I'm very delighted that we have Duncan Baker Brown from Brighton as our guest today. Duncan is a practicing architect, academic, and environmental activist, and author of Reused Atlas, a designer's guide towards a circular economy. His vita is very long, but our interest to invite him lies in his approach of testing the viability of a number of practices and materials, recognizing the potential of discarded waste as a valuable resource in the future of construction, as well as live projects as valuable teaching aids. And through his projects, he fosters community development and regeneration, working with apprentice builders and students, informing young people of all ages to their role in sustainable living. Duncan creates examples of community practice that through the use of innovative techniques such as resource mappings can redefine what local materials are and match them with local skills and traits. Duncan will introduce his practice with a presentation before we are going to have a discussion how we can support a low threshold participation in city life from the citizenry. And if you have any questions, you can tweet back them by YouTube. So I welcome Duncan and thanks that you are with us today.
Thank you very much, Folke, and Wolf. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to meet you this lunchtime, albeit digitally, but that's what everybody's doing now, so it is feeling like normal times. Can I share my screen and I'll start with my presentation. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I want to talk to you about urban mining, searching for new material sources to reduce the need for our dependence on natural raw materials. And urban mining is also, I think, to do with human resources as well. So I come from a position of considering our cities as material stores for the future and for now, actually. I'm going to talk about a project I did a couple of years ago because it involves so many different networks and organizations, community groups, academic institutions, even politicians. And it was called the Brighton Waste House, even though it isn't a house. It's a sort of teaching resource and live research project on campus at the University of Brighton. And as it says at the bottom there, it's Europe's first permanent building made out of 90% material other people threw away. But before that, it had an interesting sort of origin and different project. This was a project to prove that you could build a house in 6 days out of organic, sustainably clean, non-toxic material, and it was called The House That Kevin Built, and it was a Channel 4 Channel 4 TV program, and that's it. On the 6th day, we actually we filmed the first day twice. It was actually only built in 5 days. Now, the point of it was to prove that organic material could be precise could have a really good low energy value. And here it is built in London. But it was made out of materials that were from about 15 miles away from site. It was the UK's first ever A+ rated dwelling from the point of view of very low energy consumption. We had 5 million viewers a night for the program, so there was a huge interest in it. And unfortunately, it had to be deconstructed after 6 days. So the idea was to try and get it on site, rebuilt at the University of Brighton, but we couldn't get that to happen. So it ended up at the University of Bath, where it still resides. But it made us think about things. And I'm, for years, been very interested in using organic, non-toxic materials in construction. But meanwhile, what about the waste everywhere? And this is in about 2013, I was thinking this, or no, 2012, actually. What about ocean gyres? What about the resources that we've already used up and thrown away? Now, some issues to consider. Mining raw materials is costing more and more every year. Throwing stuff away, and there is no away, is costing people more. And it's also, now we are understanding, costing the environment more. So I'm saying smart individuals avoid doing both. And so we turn these linear systems into circular ones. So we're trying to get into a world where there's no such thing as waste, there's just stuff in the wrong place. So in about 2012, we started working with students, trying to think how they could design out waste in their projects, how they can incorporate using waste in their projects. And this was a student project for a building that sort of stored waste in the fabric of its walls. And of course, it influenced what became the waste house. So we started doing public events, advertising the fact that we wanted to prove that waste material coming from construction sites, generated by construction sites, was valuable. And so we set ourselves this ambition of doing a passive house standard building, very low energy consuming building in use, made out of material that normally got thrown away from construction sites. And at the time, there was this amazing statistic that for every 5 houses being built, 1 house worth of waste went to landfill or incineration. So here you've got one of the first meetings where you've got people in the construction industry, apprentices, students, academics, and students also learning building skills as well as designing skills, and engineers coming together because they wanted to help with the design and construction process of the waste house. And this is us launching the project, and we're actually leaning on these black blocks, which are actually very expensive, but we found them, they've been thrown away. So these are building blocks that are insulation, damp-proof courses, and they're load-bearing, and they're very expensive, but it's the sort of thing that people throw away all the time. From the beginning, we made sure it was high profile because we had to generate interest, to generate material for people to, in effect, send to us. We were working with students, some of them as young as 15 years old, who are working in technical colleges learning construction skills. So here's Michael, who's from Brighton City College, and he's studying joinery and carpentry, and he was one of the team that made the timber beams and columns for the waste house. And here they are arriving on site, and you can see the students, taking ownership of this stuff. So they've got their names written on the beams there on the left, on the right. So here's a shot which shows a combination of architecture and interior architecture students, construction students, plus the man on the left is a carpentry tutor. So the way we built the house was to have students supervised by experts, learning their trades, but also having to come up with design solutions, because we were constantly having material arrive to the site or suggestions of material, and it wasn't always appropriate that, to be used. So we then partnered an organization called Freegal, which is a UK version of Free Cycle. And they've got a network now of 3.5 million people subscribed to Freegal. So it's an online swapping platform of whatever. So we use Freegal to call out for materials. Now, what was interesting is Kat Fletcher from Freegal started saying, well, instead of just using construction material, why don't you draw people's interest, attention to the stuff we throw away every day? And so we started immediately thinking of plastic. And at the time we were developing the design for the waste house, the last DVD rental shops on the high street closed down because everybody's live streaming and downloading now. So suddenly there's millions, if not billions, of CDs, and the packaging with the CDs just redundant. And as you can see from these school children who every week while the building site was live, we invited school children on a Wednesday morning to visit the site. There are other plastic things from the 1980s and the 1990s that they're still with us, but we've forgotten about them. So we were raising awareness of these artifacts that had not been disposed of properly. And we filmed everything. So that's a student filming the process of school kids coming to see the site, but also the build. So we documented everything. And some of the school kids were pretty young. These are sort of 5-year-olds. And for a lot of people, what was amazing is that they were allowed on a building site, but it was amazing to have people of all generations on this building site. We had a summer school when the term ended in June. Over the summer, we had a core group of 50 students, and it was actually half design students, half construction students who carried on building the waste house. What was amazing is the man in the middle of that shot with the tie on is a building site manager who has 35 years experience, and he constructed the building in only 1 year, and he didn't know who was going to turn up on a daily basis because it would be whatever students were available, and he still turned that building around in a year. So we started to attract all sorts of interesting waste flows because we weren't just focusing on construction waste anymore. We were just saying we want to raise awareness of design products without an end-of-life strategy. And this is perhaps the dumbest. So we could collect 25,000 toothbrushes in only 4 days from Gatwick Airport. So this is from jetliners that land at Gatwick. They've done a transatlantic trip on Virgin Airlines, and they've landed at Gatwick, and then they get cleaned out. And if you travel for long distances, you get given gifts by the airline. And this is toothbrushes. Now, who sits in an aeroplane and brushes their teeth? Nobody, but it's supposedly to make you feel better about flying with Virgin Airlines. So these are 25,000 toothbrushes, predominantly never used. So if you think about it, it's oil processed into plastic, processed into toothbrushes, put on an airliner, flown across the Atlantic, landing in the UK, cleaned out and sent to incineration in the period of about 2 months. What a silly thing to do. So we thought, well, we'd use the walls of the waste house to contain these products. And if you reflect on the fact that most plastic ever made over the last 100 years is still with us one way or another, and I think most people are now very aware of this. But there are other waste streams that were interesting as well. So we found a UK-based company that imported Chinese-made denim jeans, brought them into the UK, cut the legs off, and they are the company that sells most denim shorts for rock festivals, music festivals. But of course, they have this waste stream of denim legs, which is actually, denim's a very good insulator. We had other materials like these vinyl banners we were able to use as a vapor control layer in the building. We used bicycle inner tubes for soundproofing. And this is on campus nearby, next to the waste house. Every year, the architecture students create a pavilion to show their graduation work off in. We deconstructed the pavilion and used that material in the waste house. While we were waiting for the waste house to be completed, we took part in Europe's largest construction fair. We were commissioned to make this waste totem. That's the image of it on the right. That material was secondhand ply, painted with secondhand paint, and that ended up inside the waste house. But we also, it was the first year, this is 2013, that we did this 3-day symposium, which we called the Waste Zone, which is academics and practitioners coming together to talk about eliminating waste. And there's the waste totem lining the inside of the waste house studio. This is Kat Fletcher from Friegel, and she was really keen that we should use plastic carpet tiles, and we had carpet tiles on campus because they were renovating studio spaces, and we didn't know what we were going to do with them at first, but we're working as a collective here. So what was really interesting is one of the students on site decided, why don't we them to clad the outside of the building. So we got the carpet tiles fire tested because that's a big issue. They perform very well with fire testing. The man in the red hat is actually the head of building control supervising the testing. And then we got students playing around with these tiles on site to sort of design the details for the house. So that's the way it worked. My role was to sort of coordinate what the decisions and the networks, but we were putting the responsibility of the design of these junctions, etc., with the students on site. And it was actually a 15-year-old carpentry student that came up with this folding the carpet tile around the corner, which is a lovely detail. And when you use materials with a sort of heritage, a narrative, you get this, you get different aesthetics, you get different meanings. And this is the upstairs studio of the Waste House, deliberately left unfinished. I mean, it performs properly as a building, but deliberately left with elements exposed for students to think about how the building's put together and also raise awareness of the issues that the building was dealing with. We also used earth. We created a lovely big rammed earth wall in the middle of the space. And here, one of our women students there is compounding, ramming the earth there on the left. And here we got young kids coming to touch the earth because it's a really hot day, and that it's actually rammed chalk, and that chalk wall was really lovely and cool on a warm day, and it's beautiful. And that's the house finished, it's the teaching facility. So when we open our borders again, you're all welcome to come and have a look, because we have a lot of visitors to that building. Now, this is trying to quantify the 55 tons of waste material that went into making that building. We got 4 of our students became building apprentices because of the work they did on the Waste House. And it led to other research projects and other considerations. So thinking of buildings as material stores, but also material stories. And we had this Interreg EU funded project that we did where we were asked to locate other material waste flows near the Waste House and consider, for example, here's duvets and bedding. We've got way too much of that going to landfill, and we turn that into insulation. And here it is, we're testing some bedding insulation on the Waste House itself. So we actually got proper sort of, looks a bit low tech there, but proper sort of monitors measuring the performance of this insulation. We're looking at other waste flows from construction sites, from restaurants. So we've got oyster shells here, and these are tiles on the outside of the Waste House that are made of 100% oyster shells. And they're beautiful. The ones that are a bit pinky have got construction waste in them as well, but the white ones are 100% oyster shells. So we need to map these waste materials and map their meanings. And we've done a lot of work with this. This is an exhibition. We've used GIS mapping to locate waste flows in and around Brighton. And that was that's the sort of map there with some of the materials that we found at an exhibition. So this is the last time we did the waste zone. It got really big. You're looking at the waste zone there. So there's people speaking and people exhibiting, and it's all around the idea of circularity at the scale of the city. And there we are. That's Kat Fletcher. That's Nick on the left, who's a product designer, myself, and then Professor Michael Braungart, who joined us for the talks. I wrote a book about it that was referred to earlier, and I came up with this idea that what we're doing, we're urban miners, but we're mining the Anthropocene. We are reworking the human-made products out there that have been discarded, or some that are being used. So mine the Anthropocene and nurture natural resources. We don't need to mine in a conventional way anymore. So we need to learn how to manage planet Earth's resources, and we are all resource managers. So since 2010, the construction industry has nearly halved the amount of waste it sends to landfills. So that's good news. Nearly 20% of the construction industry is circular already, but that's mainly recycling. And there's lots of good news at the moment. So we are now in a different world where people are talking across disciplines. So I've put these slides up because the climate framework is a cross-industry action group defining climate literacy. The Royal Institute of British Architects and the London Energy Transformation Initiative have all agreed on a carbon descent plan. But what we need is smart cities, big data, to quantify the resource potential of places, whether that's with building information modeling. And here we've got structural engineer Prue running different scenarios for embodied carbon in different structural engineering designing with different materials, even calculating the different lorry journeys for different materials. So you've got embodied carbon as well as operational carbon. So we've also borrowing from big data, this idea of hyperlocal, really understanding from random participation to active mining, people, processes, resources, and spaces. And some people have been doing this for a long while. So Superuse in the Netherlands have their GIS harvest map locating resources so people can swap resources. They do it themselves, so it defines projects. So here they are, they found some wind turbines, so they then found a client that might like wind turbines. They turned it into a children's playground. Here's a building. This is another Superuse project that needs to be demolished, you'd expect, but they deconstruct it. They did it with children. So what they did is they printed off a 3D model of the building. Then the pupils of the school were able to reassemble those parts in a different way. And that was the net result. So that's a secondhand building, or a building made out of secondhand parts. Out in industry, you've got organizations like Metabolic, who are mapping the digital potential of places. Mapping the resource potential of places digitally. So this is the Greater Amsterdam Metropolitan District. And what this information gives you is the resource potential of those particular places within Amsterdam. And I just wanted to talk about Elma Dermovic, because she's a practicing architect in the Netherlands, and she's got a Revit bolt-on that does a 3D survey of an existing building and then can sort of in effect digitally unpack it, look at the quality of the material, and then consider how it could be reused or recycled. And we're doing that in a similar way with my own build practice. So here's an existing 3 short tower blocks that we're adding material to. Actually, what we're doing is doubling the amount of housing units on site, but halving the carbon footprint. So there's a sort of before and after. We're not demolishing a thing. We're reworking what's there. I'll just end with this. If there are any students or even academics that want to contact me, because we're working with Rota from Brussels and Bellestock from Paris, and we'd love to work with you guys as well this summer for a digital summer school. It was not meant to be digital, but it was put off from last year. It's called the School of Reconstruction. Please contact me, because we're going to open up invitations for people to take part in August. Thank you, and keep safe. Could you unshare my screen, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Duncan, very much for these great examples to hopefully, save materials. But of course, we know that there are already many innovations, but still, I think we still can reduce even more environmental damage. And the question is actually, what do we need more to promote widespread acceptance and implementation?
We need a couple of things at once. We need to point out the benefits of this. I mean, we're talking about a better life because of this, not a worse life. I think a lot of people think that by saving the environment, there's going to be some sort of negative sort of impact on humans, and the point is the negative impact is if we do nothing about it. So I think we've got to be clear always what the benefits of these things are. The other thing that's got to happen is we need legislation. We need I mean, I'm saying at the moment we can't really wait for central governments to decide what they want to do. I think it's the people in charge of cities and regions who are being really proactive at the moment. So, for example, around the world, there are different cities with circular economy route maps. There's over 150 circular economy route maps out there now. So this is legislation in effect that's saying if you want to build in Vancouver, or if you want to build in Berlin, or if you want to build in London, you've got to do it in a different way. And if it's a circular economy route map, it's telling you how to be resourceful and rework what's already been made, and also consider your buildings as material stores for the future. So what we have in the UK is building regulations that are not very ambitious at all. and they're still not very ambitious. I don't know what's happening with them. And then we've got, at the moment, we've got 90% of local authority regions declaring they want to be net carbon zero within 9 years of today. So they're up there. There's nearly 1 billion people around the world that live in regions that have declared a climate and ecological emergency and then saying they want to be net zero carbon. It's law in the UK, we've got to be net zero carbon by 2050. So building regulations aren't serving us well. The way we're doing it in the UK is to have things like the circular economy route maps, but then we have what they call supplementary planning documents. So it's to do with the planning legislation in a city that says if you want to build here, you've got to beat building regulations requirements by 100% or something, because the politicians have said they want to be net zero carbon within a decade or 20 or 30 years. And so the officers in charge of procuring schools, infrastructure, roads, whatever, they've actually got to meet these net zero targets. So it's actually, for me, it's a very positive time. Certain bits of legislation are dragging behind. For example, in the UK, if you want to work on an existing building, you have to pay value added tax at a rate of 20%. If you demolish the building and do a new build, you don't pay any value added tax. So at the moment, in some cases, you're encouraged to demolish perfectly good buildings. That will change soon.
I hope so, yeah. In Germany, it's actually the same. And also, I mean, the building regulations in Germany, they are totally, 100% regulated. And I think it's over-regulated, and they definitely have to change this in order to this. The other question we have, how could computer science cooperate with other science to support interdisciplinary exchange? You gave us some examples already, but how do you think that other science could, influence it?
I think it's going to impact on it and make it more immediate and accessible. At the moment, the amount of work, I mean, you know this, Folke, that the amount of work you have to do to find material, justify that it's safe, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If we've got material passports, for example, this is digital information on all the components of an existing building or an existing product or whatever it is, then you've got that access to information. And a material passport, there's a lot of work being done in Germany, actually, with the Madasta Foundation, who are doing a lot of research into material passports. This is the data that would tell you immediately, as the owner of a car or a phone or a watch or a building, what you can do with your thing, whatever it is, at the end of its life. What elements can be reused, repurposed, or recycled. And the data would be there immediately. And then, in addition, we've got the networks already, whether it's Amazon or eBay or whatever. Those sorts of networks give you immediate access to information that you need. And we just need to plug into those existing networks with the sort of maps that Superuse and Rotor and people and Metabolic are really interesting. So that sort of data, plug it into those networks. And so, Folke, if you suddenly need 25 doors and you don't want to have brand new doors, there's a resource there. I mean, we have the networks already, but what we need is to just promote the benefits of this. Why bother with something secondhand? Because as soon as something's secondhand, how do you prove that it's up to the job that you want it to perform? But again, with data, we can do that.
Are you thinking about the idea of digital twins, Duncan?
Yes, that's a really good point, Wolf. Sorry, you're going to say something, or should I?
No, I just wanted to know your.
I mean, this
is what it comes down to, right?
Thank you for mentioning
to simulate
that.
In some way the future behavior of what you have.
Yeah. So digital twins are really interesting from that point of view, because they don't just need to be for new buildings, they can be for existing buildings. So we can map what's already been built. You know, in the UK, pretty much 90% of what's with us at the moment will be with us, trying to meet the demands of the 2050 net zero targets. So we've got to adapt what we've got. And I think it's the sort of, what's interesting at the moment over the last 2 years, there's a lot of consultants and agencies coming up with their own embedded carbon tools, for example, as bolt-ons to all sorts of different software packages. But this idea that we have for the last decade or longer had in effect digital twins. We just haven't used them very much. I know I was doing workshops with the Department for Education this time last year. They're meant to have digital twins of all their new schools, and they admitted they haven't. I mean, that's just quite a big deal. So this time last year was when we started using these platforms, and when we all learned pretty much how to use Zoom or whatever it is. And we will all carry on using digital platforms. And one of those will be this access to information that digital twins give us.
Actually, also about the deterioration of materials. And there's an interesting question in the Twitter stream that says, or that asks, how do you cope with problematic or even poisonous contents of waste? Especially in the described project, for example, the videotapes that obviously contain.
Really good question. To start, the big problem with the waste house is that I'm not saying this is how to construct other buildings. From the point of view of the sensibility, yes, but I don't think you should be using toothbrushes and videotapes in construction. I think personally you should be eliminating plastic from whenever possible from construction because it off-gasses. So what we did with the waste house, it's covered with monitors that are monitoring off-gassing. So when those videotapes, if it gets too bad, we would take them out. The irony is that for 15 years I'd been building with natural, organic, non-toxic, sustainably clean materials, and then I get known for doing this waste house, which is basically a toxic dump. But the other irony is that it's made of timber plus plastic stuff as insulation, and that's basically what new houses are built of in the UK: plastic insulation that they wrap the buildings with, and a timber frame. So it's actually, even though it looks more radical, it's actually more conventional than sort of round earth and straw and timber buildings I've been doing before then. So that's interesting, but. So we monitor it. We're not saying you should be using video cassettes in the construction industry. The waste house is more of we've got little windows inside the building, so you can see all the different things that are in the walls. And so, it's sitting on a campus, which is now School of Art and Design. And so students there can think, right, how do I eliminate the problem of that, that product, a CD or whatever it is, not having an end-of-life strategy. So it's more of a polemic now. It's more of a, do you realize, now think harder, that the huge challenge for designers is to turn those linear systems into circular ones. And just this, that's a Fairphone. Mm-hmm. It comes with a screwdriver. That's the beginning and end of it. That is why it's so different. I was really disappointed 3 weeks ago because my headphones for the Fairphone, if the wire breaks, you can take the expensive bits off, the bits that go in your ear, and get a new wire from Fairphone, and they take the old wire back as well. But I went online to get a new wire, and they said because of Brexit they weren't exporting to the UK. I was like, Usually 2 weeks later they are again. So sorry, I was not going to mention Brexit. I must apologize. I'm missing everybody already.
But I just wonder, do you think that because I saw the kids, bringing all this videotapes and the CDs, so maybe if their parents build a house now, maybe they also want to include this material into the house, or do they already know that they shouldn't actually include this in the building? Yeah,
the way we work with the kids is that they had poor things had a 30-minute lecture from me before they went on site.
Okay.
But we did have one very funny thing. We were asking school kids to bring their old toothbrushes because everybody's got 2 or 3 old toothbrushes at home. And we had one school party of 50 kids. They arrived half an hour late and they said, oh, sorry, we forgot our toothbrushes. So we went to the chemist to buy new toothbrushes. And I was like, no, that wasn't the point. It wasn't encouraging you buy more. It was just if you've got old ones. So, and another thing happened with our wonderful site agent who was running things on site, David. The students in store, they cut some of the floor joists from secondhand timber. They cut them too short. So he said, he was very proud. He said, we haven't lost a moment on the program, Duncan, because those joists were no good. So we threw those away and then we bought some new ones from the timber merchants around the corner. I was like, oh.
Yeah, I didn't understand it. Yeah.
Well, that was the guy who supposedly did understand. But what the point was, it's really difficult to change behavior, learn behavior, and 35 years of throwing stuff away and just buying new. So we did have some interesting discussions on site.
I guess it's also a problem not only of the behavior that has to change, but of the priorities, especially in costs, right? Because what you do is a lot of handiwork, right?
Yes, exactly.
And a lot of manufacturing things. You talk about the oyster shell tiles or something like that, which is a great idea, by the way. I would love it. I mean, it resembles a little bit the Flintstone houses that are very common along the coast, right? In that design. But I mean, this takes a lot of collecting things, of manufacturing things, into transforming things into something different, right? And on the other hand, maybe this manual work and so on makes it more expensive and thus less economic, right, than manufacturing it from scratch, right? I guess that was one of the most used arguments before, right?
Okay, can I answer that? Because it's a brilliant question, and one of the most important ones. Using secondhand material doesn't save you money, it saves resources. So at the moment, while it's small scale, disconnected little projects all over the world, you spend more time on labor. So if you have a bit of timber that's secondhand, you've got to make sure it's got no nails and screws in it. So you spend ages with that, but you might have got it for nothing. So the end price is perhaps the same. There is another issue around what we tax. So we tax labor a lot. So labor is expensive and materials are left alone a lot. So they're less expensive. So we need to change the way we tax things, where there should be incentives for reuse. And we need to encourage a diversity of trades as well. So that's good. But I think as the networks, or as the big networks that are already there, realize there's something to be done with the circular economy, it's a good thing. Then it will right itself in terms of it will become the cost-effective way of doing things, because, for example, in the UK, the VAT issue would have changed. But what is interesting is something. This is one of those oyster tiles. So it is basically concrete, but basically half the oyster shells get crushed up to get the aggregate, and the other half get fired. You're burnt to create quicklime, and you mix it together, and we cast it in a silicon mold. So there's a carbon footprint associated with recycling. So it is interesting, but it is only recycling. So, but it is diverting. It's 50,000 shells a year just from one little restaurant. So it is diverting waste flows. But the other interesting thing with these tiles is that they absorb carbon for all their life. So while they're continually curing, they're absorbing carbon. So even though they create a carbon cloud, they then absorb it. But personally, I'd prefer it if we weren't creating any new carbon. But we're at a sort of transition stage at the moment.
There's a question in the chat. Maybe it's also very interesting. How do you manage participatory decisions making within the projects?
By when it's a construction project, I think one thing that's vital is that there is someone that really understands how different materials perform in the construction of a building, so that when you get inundated with lots of what was happening with our project is that Kat Fletcher from Freegal, she didn't know anything about construction. She just knew about waste networks, which was really important. So she would the local authority, the city, they gave us a building to store material in. So all sorts of material was arriving. And for example, the vinyl banners, she would say, I've got 1,000 vinyl banners. And I was like, right, I don't know what we're going to do with those. But yeah, okay, put them over there. And it took me about 3 months. Initially, we used them to protect the site when it wasn't watertight. And then we realized, we did a bit of research, and that they were all right as this permanent sort of vapor control layer. So I would coordinate that. I would go to site and probably walk away from site with 10 material decisions to make, or decisions about materials. What I was doing is offloading the design decisions to the students. So we had a framework, literally, the building's this shape. But now if you've got a pile of carpet tiles, how are you going to make, you've got a week to work out. Those tiles are there, play around with them. And what was amazing is that the process is obviously empowers, because it's not you haven't got to wait for the architect to turn up on site and tell you how to do things. It's a collective. What was amazing is when we had the summer school, so that was 3 months, July to September, where it was active all the time because students didn't have to go and do other learning. They were just on site. It was great. We had a team of, it happened to be 4 women who were interior architects, and they were on site from the beginning. So they had that experience. They'd been on site for 3 months. And then we had carpentry students turn up, and those interior architects were training the carpentry students about carpentry. So that was what was amazing. We also had people who were homeless turning up saying, I've got nothing to do, can I join in? So with that, for me, that was some of the stories for people from really difficult places turning up to the site, joining in. And what I like about live construction projects is that there isn't the sort of hierarchy of class. We're still class obsessed in the UK, so that just goes out the window. It's what can you do, how can you help? And one lad who turned up on site, and he was physically sick for the first 3 weeks, had a lot of issues. He was actually the lad that solved the carpet tile detail at the corner, and he's gone off and he's got his own business repairing bikes or something now. So, and the other last thing is that we've got a whole cohort of carpenters, plumbers, decorators, all the different trades from 2000 who graduated in 2018, who'd never worked on any other project apart from the waste house before. That was their only sort of live experience. They're now working for contractors, and they're normal contractors, and they'll all be saying, oh, hang on, you don't need to throw that away. So that was, for me, one of the best legacies.
So it's a shift in the brain. You have to change your behavior.
Yeah.
I remember we had even some psychologists on our construction site, because the person was only communicating, and he couldn't see anything. He couldn't see a result, and finally he joined us just to deconstruct or to take the nails out of the timber, just to help us. And it was sometimes you see immediately the result when you join these processes.
We did have with those vinyl banners, the reason that they were so-called waste is because they're the sorts of things you have, when you have festivals in cities and things, they hang a banner on the lamppost or whatever. And so these banners are made of vinyl, which is really easy to recycle, apart from the fact they had these little polypropylene or copper eyelets, little hole, eyelets at the top of the banners to put a rope through so it can hang it on a lamppost. Because of those eyelets, they could easily just cut them off and recycle those, but they don't. That's why it goes to incineration, just for that little thing. So because we raised awareness of this with the waste house, those banners are now in the UK are now recycled.
Oh, super!
So that was I didn't know about that. Kat Fletcher told me about that only about 2 years ago. I was like, oh wow! So I think you can affect change, and we are in a totally different place now. It is it is incredible the sorts of discussions I'm having at the moment. It's not just with like you guys who are sort of like-minded people. I'm invited to all sorts of places I would not normally be invited to. I was invited to a talk last year by something called the Major Projects Association. I've never heard of that. They're the people in charge of, we've got HS2, which is this huge, very controversial infrastructure project in the UK at the moment, destroying ancient woodlands as we speak, sort of thing. The people in charge of that, they're wanting to know about what we're doing. So we are in a different place. We have a huge opportunity at the moment.
Mm-hmm. There are more questions in the chat. Should I read them to you? Yeah. What is coming to my mind is the question whether, especially in building industry, we have a more and more specialized sourcing process linked to a huge bunch of regulation issues, forcing architects to use exactly this or that material for special characteristics. So if you use now this video tapes, of course, it has other characteristics. For example, I think about statics and construction?
Yeah, well, like I said earlier, we wouldn't be using off-gassing toxic waste in buildings. That was for other reasons. I think what's really interesting now is people are understanding it's about an informed supply chain. And so, for example, there's a large building, one of the largest property owners in the UK is a company called British Land. They own a lot of the big tower blocks in the City of London, the financial district of London, which, you know, those towers are going up and down all the time, just because, and they have a life expectancy of 20 years. They could last for 200 years, but they don't, because financial institutions want to rip out the insides of the building every 4 years and the outside every 20 years. There's a company, British Land, they just stripped the facade of one of their towers, cleaned up the glass and put it back on, which was like, wow, they did that. So they've updated the joints, the silicon joints, it's called curtain walling system. They've updated that, and they've reused the glass. So it'll be up there for another 20 years at least. That is a big deal. How did they do it? How did they get building regulations approval? Because the curtain walling they were taking off was only 20 years old. The main contract, the supplier, the manufacturer still exists. So they got the original manufacturer to take off their own cladding, as it were, clean it up and put it back on. So it's got all the guarantees required. And that's what's going to happen. It's going to be about corporate responsibility. So you may or may not be aware of this, but Philips Lighting now, they do a lease lux scheme. So you don't own the light fitting. You have an agreement with Philips, who make the light fitting, to provide you with the correct light level, lux level on the working surfaces in your room. So Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam has got hundreds of thousands of lights. They're all leased from Philips. So that means that the manufacturer has to maintain those light fittings and then replace them at the end of their life. Now that means that that manufacturer is responsible for hundreds of thousands of light fittings, and therefore will design those light fittings to be last longer, easier to maintain, easier to deconstruct. And then they've got the material as a resource, because they've got so much of it that then they can recycle or reuse that material for new light fittings. Same thing with that facade. If that facade company, it knows that it's actually you can lease facades. That's the next thing that's going to happen, lease facades on buildings. So that's really interesting. I hope I explained that. Okay, but it's basically the manufacturers still own the things that they make. So they end up, instead of you and I having to throw them away and not knowing how to do it, they don't throw it away. It's a continual resource, and it's a circular thing.
So Duncan, there seems to be kind of like a twofold thing here, because on one hand you're talking about the industrialization and the kind of like the professional cycle of building, of you know, like reusing facades or leasing buildings basically, and having people that are professionally responsible for them. On the other hand, you're talking a lot about community projects, about you know, like an unprofessional way of doing things, of building houses or so on. What do you envision in this in the future? So will these community practices be scalable to the degree that you would need to replace the professional things, or will we have both, or will kind of like when the change of mind is done at some point, and all the big companies do the recycling and do the reuse of materials and everything, will the community projects have served their purpose and that's it? Or what do you see? How do you envision it?
You're pointing out the huge danger, because obviously large international corporates can, if they own everything, if they lease everything, that's not good for us. That means, you know, they own the water, own whatever it is. So I think that's a huge thing to watch out for. We do need to work out how to balance the two, because I think it's good news that there's more sense of corporate responsibility. However, the problem is that we've got the corporations are getting bigger and bigger and merging, and you're ending up with 10 big companies that run everything. So that's a huge danger. But actually, the great thing about working with existing places, with existing communities and existing infrastructure, etc., is that the local people and networks know it better than anybody else. So I think that's where you're going to get diversity, and that's where I'm interested in the sort of idea of the hyperlocal. And I think it's I mean, I can't answer that in a completely positive way, because I think that is the dilemma. As soon, you know, it's interesting that Philips might carry on owning all their lights so that they recycle them and reuse them correctly. However, it means as an individual, you don't even own the lights in your house, or what, you know, I don't know, that might be a problem. So I haven't really got a positive answer for that. What I do know is that there are lots of really interesting community projects out there that are reworking the system. And I don't know if anybody knows this book. Do you know that book? Anyone know it? Yeah, so that is all about community projects around the world that are working with reworking existing situations. So I think there's a dilemma, and I don't know how the two are going to come together, Wolf. I've got to be honest. I think it's the big question. And in fact, you know, in a way, my experience of I'm getting asked by financial institutions to do this tour, to talk to financial institutions, because they're thinking, oh wow, we can carry on in a way, you know, we'll be in control of it. I know the ABN AMRO Bank in the Netherlands, it offers circular economy consultancy for nothing at the moment, because it sees it, you know, it talks about not just being a financial bank, but being a materials bank moving forward. It will, which sounds great, it's using the language of the circular economy, but it just means it's holding on to more for longer. So, yeah.
So in the end, it's a power struggle that there always is, or always will be. I mean, we've seen the same thing happening in the digital world. Of course, there are community projects, there is an open source community and such like, but you do have the elephants in the room, right? You do have the Googles and Facebooks and Apples and whatnot.
The other thing that happens, Wolf, is that when we found this with the waste house, the first lot of timber and stuff that we were getting, we got for nothing. And then people realized there's a market here. Okay. So you want all our timber that we normally throw away, do you? Well, yeah. Well, now we want paying for it. So you do create a market. And so there is a point in which, you know, it was costing the same as normal because you're paying more for labor but less for material. But then as the material cools up, the labor's not getting any smaller. So there was a danger it's going to get more expensive, but it didn't. One thing I would say is that the waste house is the cheapest cost per square meter building that the university had ever done. It also came in on time and under budget. And people say, well, you had slave labor basically with all those students. That wasn't. It was, by the way, just to be clear, they were all getting their satisfying learning outcomes from academic modules by doing that live project. So, and you know, they would much prefer to be on a live project than in a workshop or in a classroom. So but I did have one student trying to be quite radical one year, saying he didn't want to go and see the waste house. It was built by slaves. So I was like, well, okay. But but I think once the networks are taking, digital networks and platforms are taking these resources seriously, then there will be a bit of it. Then it would just be common practice to rework what we've already got. We're running out of stuff around the world. That's we're going to have to be resourceful with what we've already got.
Yeah, and I mean the network effect comes with the platform where it's actually traded, right? Where you actually make the connections, where you make the maps. This is where's the money, right? I mean, people like Amazon don't produce anything. They just kind of like manage the exchange of things. Right?
Wolf, don't you think we had an interesting precedent last week in Australia where, Facebook's turned off in Australia, and now they have a little chat and they come back and okay, Facebook are going to pay a bit of money for news or whatever. But it's going to be that sort of standoff, isn't it?
At some point it will be. Yeah, I perfectly agree.
Yeah, we definitely also, I mean, the question of storage is also a big question, besides material and labor. I mean, where do you store all this material which we have and which actually exists? You know, where do you store this? Do we need the same kind of buildings, storage building like Amazon or the other big,
That's a really good question. I've got working with Superuse and Rota. They do Superuse are completely digital. So their maps just tell you there's a pile of bricks over there, go and find it. That's all they do. Rota are just about completely analog. So they have their own warehouses. So they're deconstructing part of the World Trade Center in Brussels at the moment. So they are having to find space to put it in, but they have a digital platform like come and buy our secondhand stuff. But I think it's interesting. I think what will happen is I think we have the infrastructure, digital and physical at the moment. It will just be the big warehouses that will have a mixture of new and secondhand stuff. Personally, I think that's where I don't know if we need to do too much, but eventually. But for Brighton city, where I live, we've got the circular economy route map, and one of the first things they're gonna invest in over the next couple of years is what they're calling a remanufacturing. So it will be a big warehouse where their deconstructed buildings will be stored, and until they can find the people that need the material. So in fact, the School of Reconstruction, when we were doing it live last year, we didn't do it live before it was cancelled. What we were going to do is the city, Brighton Hove City, were going to deconstruct a building, and then we were going to have the elements of that building piled up in a school playground. And that school, which happened to be empty, that was the site for the summer school that we were going to get 80 students from across Europe in. This year, we're just going to do a digital version of that. But the city were prepared to deconstruct a building that was going to be demolished. So not demolish it, deconstruct it, and then see what you can really do with the deconstructed building. So I would say a lot of cities are taking it really seriously.
But do they get support by the transportation? Because I think just in terms of weight and size, I mean, we are speaking not here from a toothbrush, we are speaking here of blocks of concrete, and tons of concrete. So do they get support by...
I tell you who's helping, and again, you ask Rota, and in my reuse atlas, I interview Rota and Superuse, and I say, how do you do this? How do you make money out of this? And what they do is, it's really clever. They work with the demolition companies. Mm-hmm. So if you're in demolition, your material's worth this much at the moment. If it suddenly becomes deconstruction, mm-hmm. and there's a market for it, your material's worth that much. So the demolition companies around the world are very interested in this, because suddenly the value of their product could double or treble. And so they have those yards already, because they are already recycling the easy stuff or reusing the easy stuff at the moment. So the infrastructure is sort of there. It's about really highlighting the benefits of this. And I mean, when we said we were going to deconstruct this building last year in Brighton, we had four demolition companies said, yeah, we'll do it for nothing, because we want, we can see the benefit in that. If we can say we deconstruct buildings rather than demolish them, and there's a market for the material, that's a huge change. And a number of them, by the way, I've seen on their websites, they're marketing themselves as deconstruction companies now.
Mm-hmm. It's the same with excavation earth, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. How much longer have we got?
Oh, we have 2 minutes to 1 o'clock. I still see one question here in the chat. Actually, you answered it already. How could you integrate regulation into the recycle processes?
Well, one thing we found out by doing the waste house is there is a lot of regulation around waste in a linear way, regulating its route to incineration or landfill. And the local waste procurers, they weren't keen on us taking their product. So the rules were we had to get hold of the material before it was designated as waste. So literally, if you put a black bag around it and that said it's what, we couldn't touch it. So that was interesting. Sorry, could you repeat the question again? Because
so how could you integrate regulation into the recycle processes?
Okay, so there is a lot anyway, but what we need to do is, I think then we need to incentivize reuse at the end of the day, because we need to understand that the value, it's the sort of natural assets that you're saving by reusing. So, for example, I don't think I said it, the construction industry consumes 50% of all natural raw materials harvested and mined every year. In the UK, 60% of all waste is that's generated annually. It's 120 million tons is construction waste. So that's all going to landfill incineration. If you can say I'm reducing those flows to those destinations, there should be an incentive for that. And I think I think our governments are going to understand that soon.
Yeah, hopefully.
So the easy way seems to be making the waste disposal more expensive.
Yeah.
Well, it is if waste. It will become more expensive if people are seeing it by slowing down the demolition process by a couple of weeks, so it's deconstruction. They're getting added value as a landlord. If you're having not a landlord. If you own a building and suddenly you're deconstructing it and you've got an asset. This is A&B AMRO's argument, is they have an asset at the end of that 30-year period. Their building's an asset rather than a deficit. So they're in a position of making more money because it's valuable standing there. We might not like what it looks like, but if you deconstruct it, it will give us more money than if you just threw it away.
That's right.
Thank you. This was a nice ending. Thank you very much, Duncan. Hopefully next time in real.
That would be lovely.
Yeah, and next time we hopefully see all the others, your audience. So thank you very much also to the audience. We can't see how many people really listen to it, but it will be recorded, and for everybody who hasn't seen it, they can watch it on YouTube. Thank you.
Well, thank you for hosting such a nice event with really good questions. I really enjoyed